have received a few inquiries for training littermates over the past couple of weeks. And it happened with enough frequency that I feel compelled to maybe expand a little bit on this topic, talk a little bit about the some of the beliefs about having littermates and separate them a little bit and disseminate a little bit how much of these beliefs are true and how many of them are valid, how much of it is a bit mythological in my opinion. And I'm going to spend this episode breaking that down and giving some information based on my experience and based on my perspective. So littermate syndrome is what we would call it, or is what dog trainers call it. It's littermate syndrome. This is when a person owns or has in their care two or more dogs from the same litter. And I'm not talking about fostering temporarily. I'm not talking about weaning. Obviously, at times, people will foster littermates. This is usually a temporary arrangement. Or if you're weaning the puppies, if you're the breeder and you are taking care of the litter because it's your litter, that's not a problem. It is inevitable for littermates to be together for a period of time. I mean, it's going to happen. They're going to be together in the litter. As they get a little bit older, they might get fostered together. It's not a big deal if it is a temporary arrangement. The problem with having them together for more than a temporary arrangement, not only the problem with that, but also the concerns that come with that, happens when it is a permanent arrangement, right? So the problem is a little bit is made up. Again, my opinion. A little bit of it is, or a lot of it is valid, and a little bit of it is a bit made up. Now, I don't want to undermine the concerns, by the way. So when I say a little bit of it is made up, I'm going to explain why I believe that. It's a big no-no, right? It's a big no. You don't want to adopt or buy two dogs from the same litter. Generally speaking, you don't want to do that. It's not a good idea. So I want to go into why that is. When you have two dogs or more from the same litter in a permanent living arrangement, you have to realize that there's some baggage that is going to come with that. Think about these dogs. They've known each other from conception, right? They've known each other from the moment they were, they were a clump of cells. From the moment they started growing and developing in the womb, they've known each other. They've had that connection from that time. Now they're born together, right? Like, this is what happens with litters. And they spend generally the first 6 weeks of their lives together. This is the first socialization period, right? So this is the time that they're together. They're learning from each other. They're learning to communicate. They're nipping at each other. They're learning body language. They're learning from mom as well. So learning all these lessons on how to be a dog. And then on top of that, if you have one or more dogs from the same litter, go to the same household, the problem there could be is because they've known each other for so long, you can have a couple of problems. And the problems are generally, from my experience, they come in one of two flavors. One of them is they become so attached to each other that you, as the owner, don't matter. That's one of the problems that comes from having litter mates in a permanent living arrangement. Because they've known each other for so long, they actually bond so much. They care about dogs way more than they'll care about their humans. And yes, they'll like their humans, but the bond will be like glue with each other. That is one of the problems. Okay, so that to me is a bit of a concern, because, and again, I'm going to separate some of the myth from having litter mates as well. I don't believe it's impossible. Some people are like, no, you never do that. Will not train anybody that has litter mates. I'm a little bit more flexible than that, because I've seen litter mates in the same household live without any issues. But I'm going to go into what makes it not have any issues. But anyway, so that's what I see as being one of the bigger problems, is when they're so attached to each other that you don't matter. You're just in the way. You're just the person that just brings some food and water and and picks up their poop, and that's about it. They matter to each other way more. This is why puppies normally should be adopted out or go to their new homes. I'm not talking about litter mates, just puppies in general. They should be going to their new homes as close to the 6-week mark or 7-week mark as possible. Not before 6 weeks, but as close to the 7-week mark as possible. Okay, so 6 weeks, yeah, some breeders will let their puppies go at 6 weeks. That's not terrible. I don't think that's terrible. A lot of breeders will let their puppies go at 7 weeks. That is typically a good point for them to go to their human homes. And then, obviously a lot of people will adopt their dogs or buy their dogs at 8 weeks. That's pretty typical as well. Anytime after that, it becomes more and more problematic with each passing week. Because once you go into the 8-week mark, but again, it's not a problem, okay? But the longer you wait, the more problematic it can become. And I've seen this. This is a real thing. So, like, if you have a litter of dogs and they're together hanging out, and then they're still together at 10, 12 weeks of age, 13 weeks of age, 14 weeks of age, they're still hanging out together, that, they haven't left the litter, what will happen, and I've seen this happen, what will happen is the longer you wait for them to go to their homes, the harder it becomes for them to like people. That's a real thing. Okay, the longer you wait for them to go to their homes, the longer you wait for, to separate them from their litter, the more they like dogs and the less they like people. And if we extrapolate that a little bit more, you can see that's how feral animals essentially become feral. If you have dogs, if you have a litter of dogs out in the, let's call it out in the wild, right? Wherever that might be. It might be the neighborhood. It might be out in the country, wherever. If you have a litter that is born out there, not in a home, just out there. The female has the puppies. They grow. They learn from each other. And then they're like a year old. Even if they happen to see people here and there, what will happen is they have so much contact with other dogs and so little contact with people that they just don't understand people. They just become very, very wary of people. They become less likely to want to make contact with people. And if you've ever worked with a feral dog, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've never worked with a feral dog, I'm telling you, it's very hard to reach them, because they don't want to look at you. They have no interest in working with you. Have no interest in making contact with you, because in their mind, you're just like a foreign entity. You're just an alien to them, because they've grown up with dogs. They've been around dogs all of their puppyhood. During the first 20 weeks of their lives, that's all they saw. They have very little to no contact with people. So in those extreme cases, you'll see these dogs when they finally get rescued, right? And to them, they're not being rescued. These dogs are being taken away from their home, which is out there with the other dogs. When you rescue them, you'll see that they have a really hard time adapting to people because they don't want to be with people. And that's the difference between a stray dog and a feral dog. So I'm gonna plug that in a little bit because sometimes people intermingle those terms and they don't fully understand. A feral dog, yes, I mean the feral and the stray dog, they're both outside, outdoor street dogs, you can call them. But the difference between the stray dog and the feral dog is the feral dog has had little to no contact with people, so they truly don't understand. They want nothing to do with people at all. And you can tell, like you can really tell a feral dog. There is some almost like a wild trait to them. Versus the stray dog. A stray dog is just a dog that had contact with people, has been around people, but they just happen to live out in the street. They're just street dogs. But they understand people. They understand the language. They understand the dynamics of being around people. That's a stray dog. These are dogs that just happen to, for whatever set of circumstances, they happen to live outside. They live out there, and that's the difference between a stray dog and a feral dog. Well, the feral dog becomes feral because they have little to no contact with people, and they've spent basically a large portion of their lives with other dogs. So the majority portion of their lives with other dogs. So we bring that back to the litter and back to litter mates. Well, the longer that you keep them in the litter, the more you tap into that feral trait. I'm not saying that that'll make them feral, but the longer that you keep them in the litter, the longer you wait for them to go to their human homes, the more and more attached they become to dogs, and the less and less comfortable and familiar they become with people. That makes sense, right? That should make sense to you as you're listening to this. Hopefully, you're getting a picture of what I'm saying. If you've experienced feral dogs, if you work with them, then I know this definitely resonates with you. But that's what happens, and that's why we want to send the puppies home as close to the 7-week mark as possible. The longer we wait, the more of a problem it becomes. Well, now let's circle back to the litter mates. Well, when you have the litter mates, you basically have a smaller version of that litter, right? So that's the problem with having two litter mates or having litters. Hopefully it's just two, but some people have like 3 dogs from the same litter, right? That's more of a problem. But either way, whether it's 2 or 3, typically it's normally 2, right? People will go, oh yeah, I'll just get 2 dogs from the same litter. Well, what happens is when you have those 2 dogs go to the same home, well, what happens is you have that litter that's a smaller version of the litter, and so what happens is they're spending still a lot of time, and yes, there is human interaction. You are hanging out with them, so that definitely helps. You're not tapping into the feral trait as much because now there are humans there to take care of the dogs. But what's happening is you are still having these dogs in a permanent living situation where they're spending the bulk of their time with their litter mate. And so then what could happen as a result of that is you are then becoming, by default, less important to them. Okay, so that is one of the problems with having litter mates. I'm going to go into a bit more detail and as to how we can make that not be a problem. Just stay with me for a little bit. The other problem that can happen with having litter mates, which I've also experienced, I've also seen this, not experienced it as in I've had the problem, but I've seen this, right, with people I know, with clients, is the other problem that you run into with having litter mates is that they'll get really, they'll develop this aggression towards each other. Okay, that's another problem that does happen, that they become so so intolerable with each other that they almost can't stand each other. That is a problem that also does happen, and it happens in a number of cases in which people have litter mates. It doesn't always happen. That's not always the case, but it is one of those things that does happen. So that's another issue that sometimes you encounter with litter mates. So there's just other things that that happen. You basically have this little community of yeah, even if it's just two dogs, you have this little community where they're just forming their own little but let's call it pack, right? They're forming their own little pack, and you're just kind of in the sidelines. And well, when you have that, sometimes they're going to get along, sometimes they're not going to get along. And when they don't get along, I mean, it could be pretty bad. And that's where the aggression sometimes comes in. So those are the primary issues that you're having with litter mates, plus other things too that come up. Now, how do we separate that from a little bit of the myth? A little bit of the myth that I've heard some people say is, no, you never under any circumstances have them. It will always be terrible. And that, in my experience, from what I've seen, from what I've witnessed, not always the case. Okay, I know people who have litter mates in a permanent situation, a permanent living arrangement, and the reason they can make it work is because they break up that little community. So let's say, for instance, that I had two puppies from the same litter. I wouldn't do that, but let's say I did. If I had two puppies from the same litter, I know I would not have the littermate syndrome problem. Okay, I know I could make it work. The reason that I know I could do that is very simple. I would just break up their little community, right? The little pack that they would have. I would break that up. I would be like, you are going here, you're going there. You will be around each other, but your little bonding time, playing time, and all of that, I will take up that time with each of you. I will become incredibly important to each of you separately. Doesn't mean I have to isolate them from each other, but I would have to interject myself and be the one that provides the bulk of the interaction, the bulk of the endorphins, the oxytocin that will come from me, the feeding, all the important things would come from me with each of them. And the people that have litter mates that live with them successfully, that's exactly what they do. And if you do that, it's essentially like they're no longer part of the litter. They just happen to live in the same household, but they're not really like tight, like glue. For it to work successfully, you basically have to break that glue. You have to be the one that becomes incredibly important with each of them. Now, the challenge is you have to put a little bit extra effort than you would if they were not litter mates. So in other words, if you got a dog from one litter and another dog from a different litter, they're not litter mates. They're just, even if they're the same age, they're just puppies living in the same household, right? Yes, you can still have the problem of them, building their own little pack, but it wouldn't be as strong as if they were litter mates. So you would still have to become important to them. You still have to break up that little community. But with litter mates, it's more important. It's more emphasis that you have to put into it, because you're not just separate, but you're actually going a little bit against their grain, right? They've known each other since before they touched the ground. So you might have to put a little bit extra effort, and that's what the challenge is. And this is why, I would not recommend a client to adopt two dogs from the same litter. I wouldn't recommend it. Is it doable? Yes, it's doable, but you have to put a little bit extra effort to make sure that you break that up, to break that bond up, and you're consistent about keeping it apart. Again, it doesn't mean they have to be isolated. It doesn't mean they can't interact, but you have to be the glue. You have to be the glue, and you have to be glued to each of them obviously in a metaphorical language, so to speak. So that's where the myth kind of comes in. People go, oh no, it can never work. Well, it can work. Okay. it does work. People make it work. Let me give you another example. There are, for instances, and I know breeders that sometimes, not all their puppies go to their homes. Something happens. Maybe, maybe two of the puppies didn't go. Maybe the breeder kept one of the puppies, and one of the puppies didn't sell. One of the puppies didn't go. Well, now they have littermates. They have the one puppy that the breeder wanted to keep, and they have another puppy that didn't go to their home. Well, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the world for that breed. If it's a responsible, knowledgeable breeder, okay, there are breeders that are not responsible. There are breeders that don't know what they're doing. A lot of them actually, unfortunately, fall in that category. But the good breeders, and typically from my experience, is the working dog breeders. I don't know breeders that, I don't know many breeders that breed for just show. I don't know many breeders that breed for just, just to have. But the bulk of the breeders that I know are working dog breeders. Typically, these are more involved people. That's been my experience. But anyway, so when you see that happen, the breeder's life doesn't go to the toilet. The puppies' lives don't go to the toilet. They are able to maintain because, again, they know what they're doing. They are able to separate them and build that bond with each dog. So to say black and white, it will never work, that is a bit of a myth. It can work. Obviously, it can. But it can be very challenging for the average person. That's where the littermate syndrome gets its name, gets its fame, because the average person doesn't know this, doesn't know the dynamics that have to go into it. They don't understand what I'm talking about. So they think, oh, look, I got two dogs from the same litter. Great. They're brothers. I don't separate brother. That's the rationale, right? I don't want to separate them because they're brothers. They think of it in human terms, which is not a good idea. And they go, I just don't want to separate them, so I have two of them. Now they're going to be happy. Well, the average person that has that mentality, they're more likely to have issues because they don't understand. Whereas the knowledgeable person, the knowledgeable dog trainer, or the knowledgeable breeder, they understand these things, so they're less likely to run into these issues. But that's pretty much what I wanted to go over in this episode. If you liked it, please share it with somebody that you think might find it helpful. If you're on YouTube, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel for more great content. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform, make sure you follow it, subscribe to it, and stay tuned for more content. If you have any questions, any topic that you would like me to go over, there is anything you want my perspective on, I'm more than happy to make an episode on any questions that might come up. See you guys in the next episode.